today. On Monday, U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy was in Thibodaux, where he was this month's guest speaker for the Bayou Industrial Group. We spoke with Senator Cassidy at the event, and we'll let you hear a portion of his remarks from the Bayou Industrial Group, where Jason Serenier got these comments.
Well, I'm here to give you kind of an update of what I've been trying to do to benefit the people of Louisiana. And I can put it in a nutshell. I'm trying to create a safer, more secure, more prosperous Louisiana. One in which people move to, as opposed to worry about their children moving away from. Now, I would tell you that, one, a lot of what we've been doing will work for the Bayou, but I'll also tell you a lot of what we're doing, frankly, is inspired by the Bayou. And I will go through it. And then hopefully leave some time for questions, if that's okay, Jody. Jody's got an IRS issue she wants to bring up with me. I think that was it. If we speak about this region being safer, more secure, and more prosperous, immediately some issues come to mind. One, we're worried about hurricanes. We're worried about coastal restoration. We're worried about flooding. We've got to think about that economic development that helps us create better jobs now, but jobs that last into the future. And then we have to think about what would make somebody stay here. Just as I was walking in, someone spoke about how, let me say first, you always live where your wife or Uncle Sam tells you to, okay? And if Mama doesn't want to live there, you're not going to live there. And so when I was walking in, someone was speaking to me as she spoke. She said, and she said, if I remember correctly, and wives want to move further north because they're afraid in the next storm, the hurricane will strike their home. Now, if Mama wants to move further north, ultimately Daddy's going to be up there too. And when I came here after the storm and spoke to Z, spoke to Fessy, spoke to Tanner McGee, that was a concern. Do we keep our population here? So how do we put all that together and things that we're doing with Congress to collaborate with you as you on the local level use these dollars? Well, let me start with coastal restoration. The Infrastructure and Jobs Act, or the bipartisan infrastructure bill, devotes billions to coastal restoration. I smile because we didn't really have earmarks in that bill, but I was one of the negotiators. And so the provision is there's roughly $3 billion for coastal restoration, prioritizing areas of our country hit by natural disasters in the last 6 years. Now that does everything but says Louisiana. New Jersey may get something, Mississippi and Texas, but Louisiana has already received hundreds of millions of dollars from that provision, and there is more that will come forward. In fact, I have my differences with President Biden, but on this, we are of common mind. The president, my staff told me he was going to call. And so I'm walking through, and the negotiations on the infrastructure bill had kind of fallen apart. But in the meantime, I've been working with a colleague on the House side. We had put together a spreadsheet. We had taken all the information that committees had been working on, and unlike the negotiation that was taking place, we also had an energy section and an environmental section. And my staff told me that I was going to get a phone call, and so it lights up spam. I'm figuring that somebody's selling me Medicare Advantage, so I hang up. And it calls right back. I said, well, maybe it didn't spam after all. And so I pick up, and it's Senator Cassidy. This is the White House. Would you be available for a call? Oh, sure, I'll take the call. And it was President Biden, and he said, Bill, negotiations have broken down. But somebody gave me a spreadsheet that you've been working on, and it looks like you are also thinking about things like environmental restoration and energy projects. I said, yes, sir, Mr. President, we are. He goes, I'm interested in that. I said, Mr. President, when you say you're interested in that, do you mean like taking the Mississippi River and the sediment that flows out of it and using that to rebuild land? He goes, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. I said, Mr. President, we can work together. And it's interesting, I got criticized for working with the administration on this, but there will be billions coming to our community to help rebuild our coastline. There's also billions for flood mitigation. And this is another, we're not allowed earmarks, but there's $3 billion for flood mitigation, prioritizing areas that have flooded in the last 10 years. Well, Louisiana has submitted, I'm told, about 50% of the claims to the National Flood Insurance Program over the last 10 years. So that is something, it's not an earmark, but it is something which is going to benefit our state. It is going to benefit our communities. There's money for hardening the grid. Again, when the president came after Hurricane Ida, he said, our infrastructure bill has money so that these power poles will not fall down again. I said, yes, sir, Mr. President, we put that in there, and we also put that money so that if somebody wants to have rooftop solar, so if the electricity does go out, they have their own electricity, or the business does, we have that too. And so there's $3 billion for renewables, there's $3 billion for hardening the traditional grid, and there's several billion to tie those two together. Now think about what we saw after Ida. When I would go down Highway 1 and there would just be phone truck and power truck just in line blocking all the traffic as they put that back up. For our economic development, for us to be safer, more secure, and more prosperous, somebody that builds a building here needs to know that she or he is going to have electricity and internet, and they're not going to flood, and that our coastal restoration efforts will dissipate the power of that hurricane. And that is our long-term economic development strategy. By the way, hats off, I just went over and toured the John Deere plant. Mike said within 2 weeks after Ida, after they got their electricity and fiber going, they were producing once more. So we have that resilience, but we need somebody who comes here from elsewhere to know that we have that resilience. And they're going to feel more secure when they see these billions going in to resiliency and to hardening our grid. The other thing, again, this region just is in my mind. If you went down to Grand Isle after Ida, it was remarkable. Some of those really high-end homes that had been built to hurricane fortified standard, they were in fantastic shape. They may have lost a shingle, but maybe if a 2x4 went through their window, they had some damage. But otherwise, they were in good shape. But if you looked at the home built in 1957 on a slab, it was destroyed. Now, it isn't just this high-end home, but Hugh Caffrey's in the audience. He sold some land to the Gulf Coast Housing Authority, and they built hurricane-fortified homes for kind of middle-income people, police officers, people who work on the rigs, folks like that. Those homes did well. So it isn't just that you have to sink $1 million. You can actually do something. Again, it's a little more expensive. I think, Hugh, you once told me maybe $200 a square foot. So, but they had buried services, et cetera. And those homes did well. So think about that mama who right now is relocating to Ascension Parish. If we can help put her into a home, her family into a home, where she's assured that, my gosh, that storm's going to hit, but that home's still going to be here, then she's going to stay here. This is where her roots are. And if she stays here, her kids will grow up here. So we're working on a housing a housing program in which all this money that FEMA comes in with to make temporary housing, which only lasts for a few years and then goes away, and then HUD comes in afterwards with a community development block grant, and Parish President Chasson's over there knows exactly what I'm talking about. And you've got billions coming in for housing, but not enough of it is permanent. Can we redo that program so that when we invest in housing, that temporary housing has the ability to transition into permanent housing? And that permanent housing needs a little bit of subsidy. That police officer cannot afford a $200 per square foot home, but that gives you a permanent structure that withstands the next. And for the federal taxpayer, it turns out to be a better deal because the federal taxpayer is not replacing it once more after the next storm. Just a little bit of an anecdote. After Ida, I was over in St. John's Parish and went to an African-American church, and there was a woman there, and she was just so humble and so wise. She goes, you know, we've had some flooding, And this is the third time that FEMA had helped me with my home. If they just got me a better home to start off with, they would have saved money and I wouldn't have had this problem. There is powerful wisdom in that statement. Now, that's wisdom not just for St. John's Parish and not just for the Bayou. It is wisdom for in Kentucky, where they just had a flood in the bottom of their valley. It is wisdom for the Pacific Northwest, where they have forest fires that race through every now and then. If we're going to help replace, let's replace with something that has the ability to withstand the next natural disaster. That fellow American, their family is better off, but the taxpayer saves money. So we continue to work on that as well. Let me mention one more thing regarding coastal restoration. Very excited about this. Very excited. We have been working, and T, how you doing, man? We have been working on something which Jim McCrary, I think, and Senator Landrieu did way back, what year? Go Mesa? Yep. What year? 06. Put together a plan which says revenue sharing off of offshore leases with the state of Louisiana, with all of the 4 Gulf Coast states, not including Florida, as well as the political subdivisions within it. By our state constitution, we have to use that money for coastal restoration and the infrastructure that supports it. But there is a cap on the amount that these 4 Gulf states can share. We are capped at $500 million split up between the 4 states. We have just passed out of committee unanimously meaning that we have very liberal Democratic senators agreeing with us, a bill that would remove that cap and would give Louisiana up to conservatively $1.9 billion more over the next 10 years for coastal restoration and infrastructure projects. Now, if we need $50 billion to execute the coastal master plan, and we're putting together in chunks, $1 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, a certain amount of money from the BP oil spill, this will be another $1.9 billion conservatively that can go creating the jobs, but also creating the protection for our coastal communities. So if our goal is for a safe and secure and prosperous Louisiana, investing in that coastal restoration, that flood mitigation, investing in those homes that can withstand storms, a grid that doesn't fall down when the big wind comes, we set the stage for folks to feel secure and safe when they live here. But we also have to think about the next generation of jobs. There's going to be, based on recent legislation coming out of Congress, an increased production of offshore oil and gas. That's a good thing. But we have to diversify from that a little bit, because that kind of goes up and it goes down. So as we speak of diversification, there's also provisions that will encourage the development of wind energy off the coast of Louisiana, but off the coast elsewhere. So right now, Schwest is building a boat for Ørsted, who is building a wind farm off the coast of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. I like to say wherever there is energy being developed in the world, there's someone named Boudreaux and Thibodeau there on the site. That's going to continue to be the case when it comes to wind energy. We're going to be building those boats, but we'll also have a hand in building in the operations to maintain them. There's also interest in doing wind energy off the coast of Louisiana. So met 2 weeks ago with someone on that, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill as well as the RISE Act both have provisions that will encourage that building of that next generation of energy resources. 2 more things I want to mention. This is an incredible opportunity for our region. Exxon asked if we would put a provision in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that would allow the sequestration of carbon offshore. Now, the whole world is going to a lower carbon future. The Europeans want chemicals, want fuels, want steel and aluminum made with a lower carbon intensity. Now, there's several ways to get there, but one is to take the carbon that's being produced when you're making gasoline, for example, and sequestering it beneath the ground. Louisiana has the ideal geology to sequester that carbon. There's a fellow speaking before one of our committees. He said, Louisiana's geography is the Saudi Arabia of sequestering carbon dioxide. So let's take advantage of that. So Exxon asked that we put this provision in. We got the provision, my office got the provision in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Coincidentally, perhaps, Exxon has just leased a lot of old oil field wells off the coast of Louisiana. And they want to take carbon produced in the Houston Ship Channel and build a pipeline, our workers building a pipeline to bring that carbon over to sequester it off our coast. Now, that means that our offshore oil field service industry is going to be employed not just serving those folks on rigs, but serving those folks who are going to be sequestering that carbon. It is our same businesses, our same core competency. It is Port Fourchon, Chet Chasson sees dollar signs lighting up in front of his eyeballs. But they're going to be sequestering carbon as well as extracting oil and gas. This is an economy which is built not just for 2022 or 2023, but an economy that is being built for 2050. That's what gives us prosperity over the next decades. That's what will encourage people to move here for their jobs and to stay here if they are already here. Another aspect of this is so-called blue hydrogen. It's in the infrastructure bill, but the Europeans want to go to non-carbon fuel. They want to use hydrogen to power 18-wheelers and push boats on their rivers. The United States will do it the same. You can make hydrogen a few ways, but one way is to take natural gas, which we have, and to produce the hydrogen, and then to sequester the carbon beneath the ground. Now, Jake Giordino was asking me about the inorganic chemistry of it. My inorganic chemistry is too rusty. But you don't just put the hydrogen on the boat, you mix it with nitrogen to create some sort of ammonia compound, and that's what you ship around the world. It's estimated that the Europeans will be buying 6 trillion metric tons of hydrogen within a couple decades. We are ideally situated to produce that. For these hydrogen hubs to be set up in Louisiana, because we have the natural gas, we have the ability to sequester beneath the ground, ideal geology, and we have the ability to get it to international markets. As one example, Air Products has just invested or announced an investment of $3 to $4 billion in Ascension Parish to make blue hydrogen. This is happening now. And when you speak to folks who think about the energy future, they think there'll be about 3,000 blue hydrogen facilities worldwide, but 100 of them could be in Louisiana. That is economic opportunity for our state, this region, using our natural resources with the workforce we already have. And if we can give them a safe and secure place to live, then they will have the prosperity we all wish to have. Now, everything I'm talking about except for the housing has already happened on the federal level. And it's already happening on the private level. Exxon has already leased those wells offshore. Texas Brine is developing salt domes and other facilities by which to sequester. I mentioned Air Products, but others, the governor, our governor, and the governor of Arkansas and Oklahoma have come into an agreement between our states to become hydrogen hub centers, each state bringing a certain amount of synergism. These are things that are business opportunities now. The contracts to rebuild our coastline are being studied and let now. By the way, our region had done its best. We were so far ahead on things like the Morganza to the Gulf that we're one of the first projects being funded here. Now, why is this important? Justice Weimer, as we walked in, gave me some of his artwork. And he gave me a painting of a beautiful Louisiana marsh. But then he showed me kind of where we are now, which is down in Leeville with a dead oak tree, a cross, and the water around the cross, and the understanding being that this is a cemetery washing away. We have the potential to restore our great state to this. And we do that. We restore our great state as a safe, secure place in which to have prosperity. We restore it as a place where people move to, see a future for their children, and in that future for their children, create a better future for us all. Now, I've spoken about all this happening on a federal level, but none of it happens without state and local leadership. And this community has that local leadership. When I looked at this facility and said I could be in Midtown Manhattan, New York City, and there would be no finer facility than this, we've got local leadership. So I thank y'all for being that local leadership. I challenge you to take these resources that will be unmatched in our lifetime, that are coming now over the next 5 years, to rebuild our community. And I am confident that with what we've been able to achieve in Congress, with what y'all are able to achieve here locally, that we will be a place that people move to. Thank you very much. Now, Jody, you told me that you have an income tax problem, you didn't file your return on time, and you want some help on that?
Well, actually, no, my clients have some concern about the new bill that just passed and the 87,000 IRS agents that are going to be hired, and what that is going to look like to the taxpayers.
Okay, so Jody, if you didn't hear her question, her clients are concerned about the new bill that just passed and the 87,000 or 80,000 IRS agents that are about to be hired. Well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is they're looking for accountants, for forensic auditors, et cetera, and those are pretty in short supply, so I'm not sure they're going to be able to hire them anytime soon. The bad news is when they hire them, they're coming after your clients. I shouldn't laugh. They say they're only going after those who make over $400,000, with the idea that those who are better off are parking money in the Caymans or in Panama or in other sorts of tax havens in order to avoid paying taxes here in the United States. And there'll be some of that for sure. And those are complicated, so they're rationale. But if you look at it, it's by independent agencies, it is estimated that they will work their way pretty far down to limited LLCs, et cetera. For example, think of the income, think of the company in which the owners take a relatively small salary and a large distribution. It's very common. My accountant tells me it's very common. So they will go in and look at that company. Are similar sized companies paying the same salary? Is yours less? If it's less, what is your distribution? And is that ratio between salary to distribution appropriate? What are things that you're taking as tax deductions? So believe me, there is a lot of money. There's a lot more money in small business owners than there is in those relatively few that are parking money in the Caymans. For what it's worth, I don't have that kind of money. But Mitt Romney, who I sit next to on the Senate floor, does. And he goes, you know, when you're that wealthy, you'd rather not take your chance of going to prison. You'd rather just pay your taxes. Now, that may be Mitt Romney the Mormon, who's, you know, upstanding character. But he's also Mitt Romney, the guy that put $100 million of pocket change into his own campaign and never missed it. So I'm assuming he has a little bit of an understanding of those people with whom he's working. So I do think that if your clients are those small business people, with the situation that I described, that they're going to be a point of vulnerability. Anyone else? Hey, Hugh.
Yes, Senator Cassidy, thanks for your remarks and thanks for carrying the Louisiana flag in this new legislation. I wanted to ask about it. Your colleague said something that I think is wise also. If you tax something, you get less of it. So in this bill that's just passed, right, signed, is law now, what are the new taxes coming and what are the benefits? You alluded to some, that's great. Maybe just, if you have in your mind a quick summary of the new taxes and the new benefits that are coming to Louisiana.
And the one that is the bipartisan infrastructure bill or the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yeah, I don't know enough to tell you, but the one that was just,
Inflation Reduction Act.
Senator Manchin, Senator Sisma got their brief too.
Yeah, so there are some benefits in that bill, by the way. But one thing that they went after is they're trying to increase corporate income tax. Now, again, for those of you who are corporations, I'm told that corporations don't pay taxes, people do. And so, sure, you may have a product you're producing and they tax you more, you just tack that onto the price and it's paid by your end user. And so when the Joint Committee on Taxation, independent federal agency or congressional agency, did an evaluation, they did speak about these taxes rippling all the way through, even to those with a reported income of less than $10,000 a year. So supposedly it was only going to be on those making over $400,000, but indeed it ripples all the way through to those I just described. So they're trying to increase taxes on the so-called book value of corporations. They also save some of their money by putting a cap on drug prices, which I keep on telling the drug industry they just had it coming. The drug industry for a while has been using various tricks to keep drugs that should have fallen off patent still getting patent level prices. There's somebody in here who's on a Humira type drug, an infusion that helps psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis and that sort of thing. And you're paying $20,000 a year for, oh no, $20,000, some ungodly amount, for a drug that's been off of patent for about 10 years. But they've used legal tricks to keep it on. We had a different way to go after that. The way this bill goes after it, the federal government picks like 20 drugs, and it says to the owners of those drugs, let's negotiate. Now, we're going to set you a price, and if you don't agree to it, we're going to take 95% of your profits. That's a little bit like in The Godfather, the offer you can't refuse, and then you wake up with a dead horse head, you know, for those who are old enough to remember Godfather Part 1. So they're saying to the drug companies, you take our price, or we tax 95% of your profits. Of course they're going to take the price. The concern is that this will go from 20 drugs to the entire book of business. And since right now we still need cures for other forms of cancer, for Alzheimer's, for other things that are going to be difficult to solve, if you're a venture capitalist and the federal government is dictating your price to you, are you really going to invest that money? Are you really sure that a President Bernie Sanders would give you a fair return on investment? Of course not. So you find someplace else to invest. So our concern, yes, they're saving money that way, but are we going to pay the price further down the road on decreased innovation when it comes to drugs? In terms of the benefits, there are some benefits. There is permitting reform in there. The Biden administration, I spoke to someone who was working, she's the vice president for one of the super majors for their offshore operations. They've had 4 applications for permits to drill off an existing rig for 4 different areas to produce oil. And they filed these like in January or something like that. And the administration has been sitting on them ever since. And she said if once we had those permits, we could be having oil on the shore of Louisiana within 6 months. So think about the jobs and think about what it would do for the shortage of fuel that we've had. The administration has not processed them. So when President Biden got up in the Rose Garden and said he was doing everything possible to lower gas prices, that was not the case. And I know it's not the case because with this latest deal, they have agreed to start advancing those permits. So they were just sitting on them on purpose as a bargaining chip to get stuff they wanted. Now all they're doing now is complying with the law, and they're saying, oh, we're doing you a big favor, as we have sat upon high gas prices for too long. So I'm a little frustrated with them, but there will be some increased activity offshore, and there will be some permitting reform that will hopefully make it so that some natural gas pipeline is more likely to be done than not. And the other thing that, again, I didn't vote for the bill, but this is a good provision. if they want to lease something out for wind energy, they have to lease out something for oil at the same time. So it puts the environmentalists and the oil and gas people pulling together to get leasing done offshore. That'll create more jobs for us as well. So maybe one more question if there is one, because I think I'm almost out of time. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Dr. Cassidy. I'm Constable Constance Johnson, and I have a question, and my question is based upon some of the questions that I've received since Ida. Unfortunately, many of our low to moderate income homeowners have lost homes. Many today do not have the provisions to pay for homes to be demolished, and they're basically concerned and worried about the future of their homes because they cannot afford to pay to have those homes demolished or cannot afford to pay what is required of them today. However, are there any provisions, are there anything that you may know about where we may be able to get some sort of assistance to help many of our people in the community that just cannot afford to have homes demolished? If you go through this community, and I represent District C and other parts of the city, you will see there are a lot of homes just sitting, but they need to be torn down.
Yes, ma'am. Did y'all hear that? Yeah. Repeat the question. There are people whose homes were destroyed by Ida who cannot afford to complete the teardown, much less to rebuild. And will there be resources in some way coming to help them first tear down and second rebuild? Fair? That is correct. So, by the way, very good job projecting. Yes, we are working for a disaster supplemental, which is just a term by which all the disasters in the nation over the last year that need extra dollars for recovery will have those extra dollars put in, and Ida would be one of those. The money will come to the state in community development block grants, which are then dispensed down to the localities. Now, Hurricane Laura and Delta in Lake Charles, they are still recovering from that. But they just got their CDBG about $500 million, I think, probably about 8 months ago. So the process can be long, but the money will come. And we're working on that, but as a follow-up, that's also what we're trying to do with the housing so that when they do rebuild, they can rebuild something which can withstand the next storm. Let me say one more thing, because I'd be remiss not to. You know, I spoke about a lot of resources coming from the federal level to be used by the state. When the bipartisan infrastructure bill first came down, and I'd go someplace and I'd say there's $6.9 billion for roads and bridges. That's $1.2 billion more than Louisiana would otherwise get. And when it comes to all the states in the nation, we're doing third best when it comes for bridges. When I spoke to the Baton Rouge Rotary, the woman would come up afterwards and say, yeah, but do we have that state and local leadership to use that money wisely? And that was her concern. I mentioned Baton Rouge Rotary. It could have been Livingston Parish. It could have been perhaps here. Let me compliment the legislature with my legislators and our governor and Sean Wilson. They have done a very good job of taking federal resources and finding the local match in which to optimize how we develop our roads and bridges. This is a great example of our local leadership, but with the governor, Sean Wilson, Vineeth, who does their internet, and what our state legislators have done, is a great example of our state leadership. We can do this. We can build a safe, prosperous, secure community, not catching up with Texas in 2023, but building an economy and a community for 2050. We can do it, and we're doing it now. Thank you again. There's already been, I think, about $500 million that has come down to help for Hurricane Ida, but we're looking to get more dollars for those folks who need further help in restoring their community or restoring their home. So we're working it, we're working it, we're working it. We want, by the second anniversary, for almost everybody's lives to be back where they should be. Risk rating 2.0 is going to start hurting people as it compounds over the time. So we're working to put a cap on that, to put in other measures that keep the program affordable, makes it more accountable for the taxpayer, more sustainable for society. So we're already working so that next Congress we can put in this new legislation and get it passed to keep risk rating 2.0 from punishing people. There is so much for Louisiana. This isn't a question of an opinion, it's a question of fact. There's $6.9 billion for roads and bridges. That's 1.2 billion, no, 5.9, and that's 1.2 billion that would have otherwise been. There's $3 billion for coastal restoration, a large portion of which will come to Louisiana. There's $2 to $3 billion to help mitigate risk of flooding, a large portion of which will come to Louisiana. And I could go down the list. Those folks who say there's nothing for Louisiana, perhaps are justifying why they voted no, but you can just look at it and you can see there's huge benefits for our state. It's not going to decrease inflation, and I do think that at the beginning of a recession is not the time to increase taxes on American people. For those making less than, I think, $200,000 a year, there'll be almost an additional $17 billion in taxes this coming year. That said, there are a couple of good things, one of which I do think we'll see an uptick in offshore oil and gas development. And now the Biden administration should have been doing that anyway, but now this bill will force them to follow the law. We're trying to increase the amount of money that comes to our state for coastal restoration by building upon the GOMESA Act with something we call the RISE Act. And that could give us as much as $1.9 billion more there over 10 years for coastal restoration projects. And that's conservatively speaking. Now within that, there's also encouragement for more wind energy. Not just wind off the coast of Louisiana, but wind elsewhere in the nation. I say that because boats being built to support wind energy deployment off the coast of Massachusetts, those boats are being built in Louisiana. So it'll bring jobs to us directly. It'll bring jobs to us indirectly by us supporting people deploying wind energy elsewhere.
We'll be back with more. Don't go away.